And welcome back to the Bison Chat, primetime version of the Bison Chat. We got Joe Cronin hopefully with us for the whole show, having some Wi-Fi issues, but I think we got that sorted out. We got the wonderful Emily Fox pushing the buttons behind the scenes. Joe, we talked last week about what was going to happen in that Nebraska game, what to expect. It exceeded our wildest expectations. It's good to have you back to talk IU football again this week. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Sporting a little throwback Reggie White jersey that I got in Green Bay last week. Just, kind of an impulsive decision by myself, but I can't complain. IU, wow, that was 56-7 in a game they were favored by 6.5 is surprising to say the least. And long story short, they made a freshman quarterback look like a freshman in more ways than just one.
Yeah, it was really a dominant effort all the way around by this Indiana football team. We're going to hear from Curt Cignetti about that. We're going to talk about the big injury news that came out of that game. We're going to talk about the upcoming re-arrival of ESPN Game Day, finally a morning show on Saturday. We'll get into the history about that, and we'll also talk about the Washington Huskies, Indiana's opponent this week, and what exactly this game means for Indiana in the big scheme of things. But let's go ahead and start with what we saw this past weekend. And, I think first and foremost, Joe, before we dive into some of Cignetti's quotes, let's start by talking about just the overall scene and the emotion, the vibe, the crowd, all the stuff going on around the stadium. I mean, what did you think of all of that? Had you ever seen anything like that at Memorial Stadium? I mean, give me your overall thoughts on the experience.
Well, first of all, I have not seen anything like that this is my third year here in Bloomington now. So I guess those previous first 2 years were a little tough to gauge considering the seasons IU had. At the time, I believe it was 4-8 and 3-9 before that. But the buildup was real. I mean, all week long, it was, hey, this is a sellout. Big noon kickoff is here. They're having the second biggest college football pregame show that has a really big turnout usually, especially when they go to places that they don't usually go to. I mean, they've been to places like TCU before, and they had a massive turnout there. And I think around that, and because Big Noon was here 2 years ago against Michigan on homecoming as well. But that was the big, let's follow this really highly ranked Michigan team around. And this more felt like hey, IU is good. We want to go cover them. We want to go see what this is about. And the buzz was real. The Big Noon scene was crazy. The signs were hilarious. It was loud. I mean, they were starting the show, and it seemed like the guys couldn't even hear themselves. Rob was struggling to get his words out. Mark Ingram was having to scream through his mic. And it was it was cool in a way. It was hard from a viewer to watch Big Noon kickoff, but from an outside, you just kind of see this all happening and see just how loud it was. That was all the pregame stuff too. And going into the stadium was down there hour and a half before, gates open, and the students are sprinting down. And it was quick. Within 30 minutes, half the student section was loud, ready. They were waving their towels, their study later towels, which also great idea. I think that was fantastic. It was a very cool scene, seeing everybody whip the towels around. And then, once they played Thunderstruck, had Cignetti ready. I mean, that place was ready to go. And we've talked about it before, this dormant fan base, the sleeping giant, as you see Twitter sometimes go around, and they lived up to the hype. They were loud. They were loud on third down. I mean, that Sean Asbury pick, that place was screaming, and it was hard to hear at times.
Yeah, it was going back to the Fox Big Noon kickoff thing. I mean, I've heard from industry people, Fox people in particular, they were really, really impressed with IU fans, the IU students, all the people that were down there. They were really excited by the excitement. I think it exceeded everybody's expectations, and a lot of it really comes down to IU just doesn't have the acknowledged pedigree as a football school. So I think that they thought, well, maybe some people will show up, but it won't be that exciting. But what we saw there, what we saw in the stands throughout the course of the game, the excitement, I mean, there's a lot of pent-up energy right now in this Indiana fan base. And to watch them embrace not just the games and being there and being present in the stadium, but also all the stuff around it really makes you think, gosh, what's going to happen this weekend now that, you got ESPN Game Day coming into town, and that is an event unto itself, as we know. Joe, we'll talk about the game day stuff in a little bit, but I was pleased. I mean, I've been to a lot more games than you. I've been around IU football for a long time. I can never remember anything quite like that. And then to cap it off with the way that Indiana played was really just another thing in and of itself. I mean, just absolute destruction. We saw that quote by Quang earlier on in the combo, favored by 6.5, but won by seven touchdowns, not 7 points. We were talking in class today, and someone noted that Nicholas Radicich, the IU kicker, outscored Nebraska by himself and didn't kick a field goal in the process. He kicked 8 extra points, and Nebraska only scored 7 total points. I mean, you don't get – this was the largest margin of victory for IU in a Big Ten game since the very end of World War II, 1945. Yep. I mean, the level of this doesn't ever happen that I was thinking throughout the course of that game just kept getting higher and higher. And it was to the point, Joe, where IU fans were leaving early because it was like, well, how many more touchdowns can we really watch them score against Nebraska? It was almost like a sympathy walkout after a while there, but still most of the fans stayed, and the vibe in there was just immaculate. It was an incredible experience to be in.
It was pretty funny talking to Cignetti in his post-game press conference. He said, the fans are loud. I mean, some people left at the end, but it was more understandable this time as compared to maybe some of the other games this season. He understood what was happening. And it also seemed like at the end, the players were really acknowledging. They ran up to the student section, were very loud back to them, and didn't necessarily thank them, but were kind of chanting "Go IU" at them, and it was a wild scene. Really like this comment right here about the Big Noon with how Jerry Yeagley, the soccer team, got a shout out there because Rob Stoney's had a big ties to IU soccer. They had the Godfather Jerry Yeagley out there. Yeah. And then also just earlier this afternoon, someone asked Todd Yeagley and his availability about being on Big Noon and some of the atmosphere. And this is a guy that has been in Bloomington his entire life, so he's never seen anything like that. Just to kind of fuel in what you've been saying about this is real when it comes to the energy surrounding this football team.
We did get a chance to hear Curt Cignetti in availability yesterday talk about the Nebraska game and some of the things that came out of it. Let's go ahead and hear his comments now.
When you're balanced, right, and we throw RPOs too, so we're not running in the stacked boxes, and we throw the ball efficiently too, so you can't load up against us. But we blocked them up front really well, and our backs made people miss, and the downfield blocking was good. So it was an explosive day, no doubt about it. And we capitalized on our opportunities, many of which were created by our defense.
Yeah, the defense really, for as much grief as they got in that Northwestern game, Joe, I mean, they just absolutely smothered Nebraska, who, to be fair, came in with some big question marks about their offense's ability to score points and move the ball. But, this was supposed to be a top 25 or a fringe top 25 Nebraska team. It was a team that was supposed to really make it hard for IU to score. We wouldn't have been surprised if it had been kind of a slugfest, if, both teams had struggled to get points on the board, kind of like the Maryland game started. And yet, not only did Indiana's offense get into a rhythm pretty quickly, but their defense just kept forcing turnovers. It created so many problems. They were able to flush Raiola out of the pocket a bunch. They were able to really jam up their running back room. For large stretches of the game, I'm looking up at the scoreboard, and I'm like, we are doubling them up in yards. And it wasn't until the very end they got a couple of yards in drives that went nowhere, and you're just kind of like, wow, that was about as complete a team performance as you could ask for out of this team. It was really, really a special environment. It was really cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's really only one point in that game where it seemed like it was close. I mean, Washington had that well-executed drive to bring it 14-7, and it was like, okay, this could be a game right here. This could be that kind of fringe top 25 matchup like you were saying. But really from the get-go, I mean, it was a 3rd and 1, Justice Ellison, 43-yard run that was like, okay, they're here. And they capitalized with the touchdown. Nebraska shoots himself in the foot with that really weird kickoff where the returner caught at the 1, stepped out of bounds, and you're kind of, even Gus Johnson was like, oh my gosh, that's a bad mistake. What? Very loudly on national TV, just calling out about how that's wrong. And then in second half, it was just go, go, go. I mean, that Sean Asbury pick, going back to that, Curt Cignetti said that was the big momentum shift. Yes, IU was still leading, I believe 21-7, maybe even 28-7 at the time. Here's the pick by Asbury, 28-7. But right there, you stop them from scoring, and then they go up 35-7. And that's kind of that, although they kept pouring it on, scored 56. That was really the nail in the coffin moment right there, because now they go up 4 scores with not really a lot of time. And especially, again, a freshman quarterback who hadn't thrown a lot of – he'd only had 3 picks heading into this game and matched the season total.
Now, the one downside of this game, really, you could say, was the injury to Curtis Rourke. Rourke, and if you've seen the pictures, I'm sorry. That was some truly disgusting stuff. That Rourke, it looked like, for all the world, like lost his thumbnail on his throwing hand in a freak injury, basically, like hits a guy's helmet and the thumb. How does that happen? That's
just so unlucky, it seems like.
Well, no, it is. That's like, I can't even come up with a proper metaphor for how unlucky that is. But even with that,
does that fill into the IU football culture about that would happen to IU?
If you can name me another program where that thing has happened, I would love to hear it, because I can never remember hearing another team's quarterback like missing time because they lost their thumbnail in the opposing team's helmet. But even with that, he came back out, led another scoring drive, and it was replaced by Taven Jackson. Taven Jackson had a really good second half. Indiana actually scored more points with Taven Jackson at quarterback than they did with Curtis Rourke. And so that's been the big topic of conversation. We got the news on Sunday that it was likely that Curtis Rourke would miss the game. Curt Cignetti seemed to confirm that in his availability Monday. Yet then there was a report this morning that made it sound like Rourke was just unlikely to play, but it wasn't a complete improbability in the Washington game. We'll keep an eye on that. But let's focus on Taven Jackson, who does appear like he's on track to be the starter. A lot of comments in the post-game availability, or not post-game, but in the Monday availability. Let's hear from Curt Cignetti and some of the other folks on the team about that now.
Okay, right off the bat, Curtis Rourke will not play this week. He'll be we do expect Curtis to return during the regular season with a thumb injury. That's all I'll say about the injury. We have 100% confidence, and the team has 100% confidence. I have confidence. The staff has confidence in Taven Jackson. I thought he played really well in the second half. He's always been the backup quarterback, and I thought he played well his first opportunity at home. The second opportunity at home, okay. Still has to practice better, but it's hard to be the second-string quarterback because you don't get many reps. And, we put a lot of new stuff in the pass game week to week. And then you look at the variables in terms of their coverages and defenses, right? He's a guy that's extremely capable. And I'm sure he'll rise to the occasion.
It doesn't matter who's out there. We're going to play to win no matter what. It's always next man up mentality. And that's the standard we got to have, the mentality we got to have going into the game. Anybody goes down, we got to be ready for somebody else to step in and continue to make plays like we've been doing.
I think you see it during the games when he gets his opportunity, and how he's responded and how he responded on Saturday. And, he's a year older, and it's a different offense. It's a different system. Tino does a great job of developing the quarterbacks. And, he's got excellent potential, and he's gotten better. And now he's got an opportunity, and he's got to take it and run with it.
Obviously, Taven Jackson, with both the IU connection with being Trace Jackson Davis's younger brother, but also the Indiana high school football connection, which is where you first saw him, Joe.
Yep. I saw him sophomore, junior, and senior year. He was the quarterback at Center Grove. Bitter rivals right there, the Carmel-Center Grove rivalry right there. Trading blows. There was a state championship my sophomore year and his sophomore year as well. And then he went on to win back-to-back, I believe, undefeated seasons. And that was an interesting offense that has that team had a current NFL running back, Carson Steele. So they were running the ball a lot. So you never really saw Taven unleash the arm talent. He always had it. I mean, he's a 6'5" mobile guy, 4-star recruit, went to Tennessee. But he's throwing the ball like 12 to 15 times a game in high school. So it was never really you never got the full eye test of him at the high school level. Sat out that one season in Tennessee as a redshirt behind Hendon Hooker and learned from there, transferred over. And then, like you said, it was a really weird situation for him last year because this team didn't know who they wanted at quarterback. They started with Taven, went to Brendan Sorsby, back to Taven, back to Brendan Sorsby, throwing Taven for a quarter, and then Brendan Sorsby to end the season. So, and then also with Walt Bell, the positions coach, was fired mid-year. So it's hard to really build any sort of continuity, any sort of confidence. I imagine that Taven might have had going into the year was probably shot in the foot. In comes the new coach. Taven believes in him. Coach Signetti believes in him. And then Coach Tino, the quarterback's coach, I mean, this guy is very talented. He's coached a player of the year over at JMU just last season. I mean, the work that Curtis Rourke has been doing this year kind of shows to the test of that. And in the second half, Taven had against Nebraska, I mean, that throw to Elijah Surratt, that is a big-time throw. That is a top throw in the Big Ten Conference in the country. That is a starting quarterback throw.
It's one of those things. I mean, I think everybody knows Taven Jackson's talented. It was a big story when he chose Indiana after having been at Tennessee, decided to transfer in. And I think last year, just a really unfortunate set of circumstances with IU not really knowing what they want to do on offense, trying to fit an ill-fitting offensive scheme, frankly, into what personnel they did have. And yet, I think you could make an argument that the best offensive game Indiana had against an FBS opponent, if you're going to take the Illinois game, maybe that's it. But in terms of other sorts of games, they looked really good in that second half against Louisville. And Taven Jackson, 24, 34, 70% completion percentage, a lot of shorter stuff, but passed for almost 300 yards, had a touchdown in that game. But it really did look like a completely different quarterback. I mean, I was joking with some folks that were in the game with me where we didn't even notice that Curtis Rourke was out of the game until like a couple of series in. Someone was like, Rourke's out. And I'm like, no, he's not. I just watched him throw a touchdown pass. And I didn't even realize that wasn't him at first. I promise I was paying attention. But what I'm trying to say is it was very smooth. You didn't see Taven Jackson come in and run something different. He came in and slid right into that offense really seamlessly. And I think that's got to give you a lot of confidence, Joe, in him. And as someone said in the chat earlier, Signetti and Tino Sunseri and Mike Shanahan, they clearly have confidence in him. That has to go a long way. They've gotten a chance to coach him throughout this entire offseason. And when you think about, as you mentioned, the amazing track record that this particular coaching staff has had working with quarterbacks, particularly a guy like Taven Jackson, the guy doesn't fall off the turnip truck. This is a 4-star recruit.
Yep.
He went to an SEC school. He clearly has talent. And to have that level of talent on the bench ready to come in and be able to fit in seamlessly, that is not something Indiana is used to.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to your point where you didn't even realize that Taven was in. Even the PA announcer for, I think, 4 or 5 plays was still Rourke completes a pass. And we're sitting there on the sidelines.
I gotta say, everybody's
two down there.
In everybody's defense, the further away you are from the field, 2 and 9 look exactly the same.
This is true. It was something that I noticed. I was like, this is like 4 straight plays that he said Rourke's completed the pass. But regardless of that, I think with the offense that Indiana had, I mean, this Mike Shanahan offense is brilliant. He is scheming guys open with this RPO system. And it seems like, I mean, the more Taven is within it, the more comfortable he's going to be. And then also the weapons that he has. I mean, 2 very good running backs with Justice Ellison and Tyson Long. And then the receivers on the outside are weapons, to say the least. Elijah Surratt, I mean, he has lived up in every way to his self-proclaimed Waffle House name. And then alongside that, Miles Price has been great. Omar Cooper is emerging as a fantastic deep threat. I mean, that back shoulder ball, one of Rourke's last passes of the game, was perfect, and he just met it at the high point. So he has guys that are going to be able to make some plays. And it's just the offensive line's been playing well. So a lot of the stars are aligning. And like that comment said, the big game, this is a big moment for Jackson. I'm also seeing this as his tryout almost for next year. Because obviously Rourke is 6th year. He's 24 years old. I believe tomorrow is his birthday. Happy early birthday to quarterback Curtis Rourke. But he'll be gone next year. Taven is likely, this is the moment right now where it's like, is this the guy we want in the future? Or is the next moment develop a younger guy or get into the portal again? So this is a big moment for him. And along with all the national attention, he's going to have to stick to what Signetti's been talking about all season long, which is the mindset and tuning out all the outside noise.
By the way, well, first I want to say this. The one thing I think you made a bunch of good points there. We'll see if indeed it is going to be a tryout for next year. I mean, I think
that's just what I think.
No. I think it's a good thought. And I think it would be great to be able to have that continuity of working with a quarterback for a year, throwing him in, getting him some reps in a couple of games. The big thing about Curtis Rourke that he does so well, and the thing that I think IU will miss in the game, hopefully just a game that Curtis Rourke misses as starting quarterback for this season, is, Rourke's ability to read the defense before the snap and make the right calls on the RPOs. That has been the secret sauce for a lot of what Indiana's done offensively this season. As brilliant as Mike Shanahan's offense is, it really does require a quarterback being in there, making the reads, and then making the right decisions. And Rourke has been masterful at that throughout the course of the year. That does not mean that we won't see Taven Jackson do that. It's just, I don't know that I would count on a guy who is still relatively young in his career, doesn't have the extensive history that Curtis Rourke has at being able to read defenses. And that's going to be interesting because I do think that for Indiana, their offensive continuity, that's what makes them so difficult to play against. They always seem to make the right calls. However, on the flip side, and this was something that I saw somebody mention in the chat, you've got a much more mobile quarterback with Taven Jackson. You've got a quarterback that does have an arm, but he can also use his legs better than Rourke. Not that Rourke has been bad, but Rourke is not the most fleet of foot. He can run when he needs to, and he's used that to his advantage. But it opens up a different aspect of the playbook now that you've got Taven Jackson. And if they can get him worked up as far as being able to read this Washington defense effectively, well, that's really good. The other thing I was going to say, Joe, actually, anything you've got on that?
Well, I was just going to add, there is one player, regardless of, this is outside the passing game. Justice Ellison is averaging 7 yards per carry on this season. He has been tremendous, has a touchdown in 6 consecutive games. The only one he didn't score was FIU. He has 2 100-yard games, two touchdown games. And then alongside that, Tyson Lawton has been great. So I think the versatility of a 2 running back system, offensive line's been very solid. They're creating holes. They're averaging just under 6 yards per carry, which is great. And then along with the weapons, I think some of the RPOs will be a little tough because, like you said, it's all about the timing with Rourke. I mean, he's really waiting until the last possible moment to either give it off to Justice or Tyson or pitch it out over to Miles, or Miles Cross has been in the mix sometimes. So I think some of those might be a little mistimed. But even when Taven was playing in that second half, he was hitting the guys quickly. He was hitting them in stride, in rhythm, it seemed like.
Before we move on to talk about the stuff coming up this upcoming week, I sent this to our friend Eddie Coten earlier on today. I wanted to share this with everybody. If you haven't seen this yet, this is available for order. The Waffle House custom shirt. This is not through. He's got his own separate version on his NIL page, but this is on an Etsy page that we found earlier. So if anybody's looking for that, you might want to track that down and purchase it. It's pretty awesome.
I will say, going back and listening to some of the highlights, I'm a little disappointed that Gus Johnson didn't bring it up. I mean, that's of a Gus Johnson call. It seemed like it was a perfect moment for him to be like, Waffle House, Elijah Surratt, something like that. Just a poor impersonation I just had.
That's fine. You know what? You got time to work on that. Like of course. You're the Taven Jackson of Gus Johnson impersonators. Okay, so like we need better reads, better decisions on whether or not to do that impersonation.
More time in the lab.
Anyway, a lot of big stories. Let's start with Washington itself. IU facing off against the Huskies, and this is not a series that gets played very often. It will be played more since both teams are in the Big Ten. But let's hear what Curt Cignetti had to say about that Washington team and what we might expect as far as the matchup is concerned.
They got a really big offensive line, big tight ends, big running back, experienced quarterback, another quarterback that's got really good athleticism, can throw the ball also. I like their wideouts a lot. They're going to be a challenge. They got a really good scheme. So, we're going to have to fly around, swarm the ball, win up front, put pressure on the quarterback, stop the run, cover, create some turnovers offensively, win the line of scrimmage, be balanced, run the ball, separate versus man. There's a lot of man-to-man coverage from Washington, handle the blitzes, and be good in critical situations. The keys of the game really never change.
They never do change. And look, this is going to be an interesting challenge for Indiana on a bunch of levels. I mean, this Washington team statistically kind of looks like a little more watered down version of the Nebraska team that we just saw on defense, but they're a better team on offense. And they've been hot and cold throughout the course of this season. They've got some interesting players. It's a brand new scheme, brand new group from what we saw last year, obviously, because that entire group is gone. The coaching staff's largely gone. But they bring in Jed Fish from Arizona, and he had a track record of being able to put together things relatively quickly. I think it's going to be interesting because this Washington team has some things going against them. Not the least of which is this game's going to be at 9 a.m. body time for them. And this is the second straight game that they've had to travel at least 2 time zones. Now, they got a bye week in between that. But last time they were out, they had to play at Iowa, and they did not look good in that game. They lose 40-16. And watching that game, I could not help but think about Indiana's last trip to Iowa when they got pounced on by Iowa and really had a miserable day. If you look at what Washington's done so far this season, they're averaging 24 points per game. They're surrendering 17 points a game. But it's interesting because their 4 wins are against Weber State, Eastern Michigan, Northwestern, and Michigan. Now, the Michigan game looked like a good win. It looks like less of a good win. Washington's opponents have only scored 34 points total this season. And it's like, the way Indiana's been scoring, they might outscore that themselves. They almost did that against Nebraska, who had allowed 68, and Indiana scored 56. But this becomes the big question. Can Indiana maintain that offensive rhythm against Washington and score the points that they've been scoring and do so at the rate where it just puts so much pressure on Washington's offense, who frankly just hasn't been that great? Can they continue to roll the way that they've rolled in the last few games offensively?
It is interesting because going into the year with this Washington team, they lost virtually every starter from the national runner-up team that they had. I mean, they had the Heisman runner-up with Michael Penix Jr., and obviously Kalen DeBoer heading over to Alabama. They bring in Jed Fish from Arizona. A lot of Arizona guys come over, and it looks like they got a solid quarterback with Will Rogers, and he's actually been playing well, and he has 2 good wideouts that have been helping him with Denzel Boston and Giles Jackson. But they just haven't really clicked all that much offensively for a team that going into the season, especially with last year's offense, it seems like, okay, you got to build at least somewhat off that. They've really struggled offensively. Now, passing defense, they've been tremendous. They're top 10, I think, just from pure statistics in passing defense. But overall, their offense has struggled. They're not going to be able to pull away from opponents, really. I mean, you've noticed that in all their games so far. They beat Michigan 27-17. Against Northwestern, when they held them to 5, they scored 24, which, yes, that's enough to get the win if you're holding the team to 5 points. But still, it's like, if you got that much momentum, you want to be able to score some more. And this is an Indiana team, again, that has not played a close game. They're on 6 consecutive games of scoring 40 or more. Their Big Ten average is ridiculous. It's like 45.5. So Washington really has not seen a team like Indiana this season because Iowa, Michigan, even Northwestern play very slow brands of ball. This is a fast-paced Indiana team, so it's going to be interesting. And, I mean, if Washington is going to have to be playing catch-up in this game, I mean, if IU goes down, kicks them in the mouth right away, it could be a long day. Now, if Washington gets the ball first, is able to work a long, methodical drive, things go a little differently. Throw Taven Jackson off his rhythm. So that's really all that's going to lie on this game is going to be, can Washington slow down this just wicked tempo that IU's been running at?
Well, and running, I think, is the right term because, as you mentioned, Washington's defense is really good against the pass. They have been really bad against the run, 99th in rush defense success on the season. And this is actually Indiana's, as much as the passing game has been a strength, what's made them the most efficient offense in America, or one of the most efficient offenses, has been that running game, Indiana, I mean. And so a steady diet of Ellison and Lawson, and it's just like a lot of different things that we saw in that Nebraska game in terms of the blocking success and their willingness to run the ball regularly and get explosive plays is going to be really key.
Well, I thought it was really fun digging through some stats and stuff. Indiana has 28 rushing touchdowns in 7 games. They're second in the nation in rushing touchdowns, only behind a team that runs triple option. Their fellow 7-0 never trailed for a minute this season, Army. So kind of fun knowing those two are top of the country in rushing touchdowns.
And not only is Indiana 28th in the country in rushing touchdowns, this was a stat from Zach
No, so
Austin.
they have 28 touchdowns.
28 touchdowns rushing.
Yeah.
The next closest team in the Big Ten in rushing touchdowns has 18 rushing touchdowns on the season. I mean, that's nuts. And it's even wilder if you think about, last year, I was talking about these stats earlier on today with Zach. So if you missed that pod, go back and watch that. But last year, Indiana had 13 total rushing touchdowns on the season. Last year, Indiana's top two running backs in terms of yardage gain were Trent Howland, who had 354, and Josh Henderson through 337. That was through 12 games. Justice Ellison has 514, and Tyson Lawton has 393 through 7 games. So the efficiency's off the charts with this. And look, I think the big question mark for Indiana, outside of can they establish the run, can they get scores early, can they start to build some momentum, can they get the crowd really into the game early? But the other question is, how does Indiana's secondary match up against, as you mentioned, a Washington team that's got some big pieces? They've got big skill players. Will Rogers is an experienced quarterback. He's probably not a top line guy, but he's an experienced quarterback. He's going to have seen some of these things that Indiana's done. Can Indiana weather that, and can they essentially kind of break the will of Washington the way that they broke the will of Nebraska? I do think that they've got a pretty good chance of doing that. But again, as we go through this, what I'm always curious about with this Indiana team is, can they keep their composure? Can they keep their focus? And can they continue to build on their feelings of, confidence and success? And they came out, we thought about that Nebraska game, like this is going to be a tough game. This might really test them, and it didn't test them at all. How do they come out in this Washington game having come off a huge win like that? And what sort of attitude do they come out with, and physically, can they impose their will on Washington the way that they imposed their will on Nebraska?
I mean, a test of the season, and really what seems to be the story of this 2024 Indiana football team, is that the team will go as far as their coach will go. And it seems like the mentality of Cignetti every week has been, I mean, he even said it just a few moments ago, that the game plan doesn't really change. It's treat each opponent like they're the same pretty much. And the biggest thing is the mentality is coming to work hard every day. I mean, he was on the Pat McAfee show last week saying, I'd rather have an hour 45 practice rather than a 2 hour 30 practice. Because, I mean, if we can get in, put in our hard work, then the guy should be rewarded and be able to go home. And if the players are responding to this mentality of the coach, if they're not looking at all this attention coming in, ESPN's here, Fox was here last week, if they're able to shake that noise, then it's just same old, go play some football, go play another team on the schedule. It seems like it's just kind of they go out to play and all they see is just 11 guys in gray jerseys, and they have no, even the Oak and Bucket game is going to be like that, I feel like, where it's not going to have this real tension, IU Purdue. It's just going to be IU playing another 11 guys on the field.
And that's very unusual. I mean, and this is one of those things, we see really good teams go out and have bad games all the time. And
yes,
that is always going to linger. And I don't even think that's an IU lack of confidence or waiting for the other shoe to drop thing. It's just kind of a fact of life in college football. You saw
Texas, you saw Alabama. I mean, it's happened to the top of the top.
So, IU is not immune to that. And this is probably, as Taylor Lehman mentioned on Bite Size Bison, this is probably on average a slightly tougher opponent if you look at it statistically than Nebraska was. But I also really like Indiana's overall approach to these things. I like what Cignetti says. I like what the players talk about in these press availabilities. They really do seem to be keeping themselves on an even keel. And I think the lack of stars and the collective nature of what this team is doing out there and how well coached they are, I'm more confident than I would be normally about their not being a letdown, especially as you mentioned, Joe, with ESPN Game Day coming to Bloomington. And this is something that we heard Pat McAfee talking about, and we actually, our intrepid producer, Emily Fox, was able to find some clips of the last time Game Day was sort of here. Let's go ahead and roll that footage and take ourselves back a few years in time.
It's like Signetti's got the boys rolling. We're going down there. First time football college game day has ever been there on a Saturday.
Oh.
So they don't necessarily count as a school that has never had college game day before, like Berkeley at Cal was, like I think Rutgers and I think Maryland and I think Virginia potentially. There's a couple others. Indiana doesn't technically count because there was a Thursday night kickoff to the season that game day was at.
Okay.
Okay, so it was like a Thursday primetime game day to kick off the season, like maybe a week 0 or something like that.
Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, Indiana has been home to the Hoosiers for nearly 6 decades. But it has never seen a season opener like this one. For the first time, Indiana opens against a ranked opponent, but not just any ranked opponent. The second-ranked team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes, are in Bloomington. This is a series they've owned. And as they walk in through the construction, Ohio State itself is a little bit reconstructed on offense and ready to put their new wares on display in Bloomington tonight. The Hoosiers, meanwhile, welcoming Tom Allen, who starts his first full season as a head coach after taking over the bowl game last year and hoping to pull off a gargantuan win to open this season. College game day opening in Bloomington.
ESPN College Game Day.
Well, that takes you back a little bit. It's funny
Wow.
that feels like a lifetime ago. Tom Allen's first game as the full-time or the first season opener as the coach. He was technically named the full-time coach December of 2016, but I was there. I was at that game day. It was a 12-hour tailgate. We did all 12 hours in the green lot, and then we followed that up with like 3.5 hours or however long that game was in the stadium. It was a fun event, but it wasn't game day like this is, and I think that's an important thing. I mean, it was kind of a special side thing to start off the football season. This is the real deal. It's a morning show. And that there's a big difference there just in terms of, I think, perception versus the reality. People are going to get a lot more hyped for this one than even they were back at the beginning of 2017.
For sure. And I mean, you look at a few things. One, the way that Indiana has now 7-0, I think, with the fact that it is the real game day, like you're saying. And then also kind of like with Fox Big Noon being here last week, they are here for Indiana. And that times 2017, were they there for Indiana or were they there for the number 2 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes? That's kind of where you throw in that. You see, obviously, the new coach.
Indiana. I know the answer to that question, Joe.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I was in 8th grade at the time, which is kind of wild to be thinking about that. What a time that was. But I mean, there is a real buzz. I mean, especially with the way game day has just exploded. I mean, it is, I would argue, the biggest pre-game show in all sports. College game day is. The setup they do is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's
iconic. It's one of those. There's not a lot of comparisons, I think, that really fit. It's a very unique thing unto itself, just in terms of being an institution and being so aligned with college football as a brand. And whatever you might think of ESPN in terms of like how they've perhaps negatively affected the overall setup with college football and realignment, the fact they've established College Game Day and kept that going for so long has really allowed that show to achieve a level of prominence that's like probably second only to Monday Night Football in terms of like institutions that focus on specific sporting events. And to finally have that come to Bloomington on the day that it's supposed to be, on a Saturday in the middle of the football season, and as you said, with Indiana ranked, taking on the defending national runners up, that is a big story. And you mentioned like the buzz. I mean, as you're talking to students, talking with your fellow students, like getting the pulse of campus, what are you sensing? What are you feeling? What are you hearing about the idea that game day is here?
I mean, they almost can't believe it. They're like, "Oh, this is really happening." Like, you wake up Saturday morning and you're just excited to watch full slate of college football. You see them going crazy in Austin, Texas, Athens, Georgia, Tuscaloosa, the classic ones. And you're like, wow, that seems like it's a lot of fun. I mean, look at the crowd there. It's football. It's the football culture there. And now it's becoming a reality. And I do want to add, I mean, think of the set of College Game Day, who is actually sitting at that desk. Nick Saban was the head coach that Curt Cignetti was on the staff of. Pat McAfee is all Indiana, just bleeds Indiana. And then Lee Corso was once the coach at IU. it's written in the stars that this is a big moment for, I mean, for Kurt Signetti, I think it's a big moment for him, but then for this school, I think it is just massive. There's not a lot of bigger things. I mean, I'll ask you this. Have you seen something, the magnitude of this, of sports at IU since 1987 when IU basketball won their last championship?
I mean, the only thing that comes close, and it's a very different kind of thing, is when, in the middle of the 2013 basketball season, when College Game Day came here for the Indiana-Michigan game. That was huge.
Yes.
That was a game between two, I think, top 10 opponents, maybe even top 5. It was a game that helped to decide the Big Ten title. Obviously, the decider came later on in the season at Michigan. But to have game day in Assembly Hall, even though College Game Day for basketball isn't anywhere close to the same thing from an institution, I remember that whole day really well. That was so much fun. It felt like after years of being in the wilderness, IU basketball had come back. This is a different magnitude entirely, because it's not just about IU football getting the national stage essentially 2 weeks in a row. You've got both of the main networks that cover college football being here, bringing their studio shows here, and allowing IU fans to exhibit a level of enthusiasm and energy about being there, but also about the football team. But it's also about how this resonates across the college football landscape. So much of what Indiana has had to do, or tried to do and often failed, is get a piece of national relevance in a very crowded and often very exclusive space. And a crowded and exclusive seem contradictory, but there's always a bunch of college football brands in the middle and bottom fighting to try to get into that top 8 or 9 programs at the very top, and it's been almost impossible for Indiana to have kind of become the epicenter of the football universe on the college level for the last 2 weeks, and continue to get attention, continue to get focus, continue to bring in recruits. And we just saw a tweet, like, you got a 4-star edge who's uncommitted from Georgia coming in. You had a ton of recruits last week. Possibility you could get Julian Lewis here this week. You got some other folks that are really highly regarded. It's one thing to be able to bring recruits like we saw into the Kevin Wilson era or even the Tom Allen era. You bring recruits, you got a 45,000, crowd, there's 8,000 seats missing. It's not really an atmosphere. It's one thing to go and look at those people and say, hey, you know what? Imagine when we really get this thing rolling and you're on the team, how this is going to be. They don't have to say, imagine how this is going to be. They just got to sit them in the stands and let them get enveloped by this atmosphere. And that, I think, is the most exciting aspect of all of this to me, and what makes it so unique when it comes to things that I've seen at IU over the course of time. There's nothing like this. And even in the 80s and 90s, like when IU had that breakthrough in the late 80s, they beat Michigan, they beat Ohio State, the media landscape was different. And so much of it now is like, to see this, to feel it, if you're sitting at home or if you're across the country, but you're watching this on television, and to see Indiana and Memorial Stadium and the area around Memorial Stadium just packed with like deliriously enthusiastic fans, that is something special. And that is the kind of thing that if you want to be a big time program, you've got to have some of those things. And I'm excited that Indiana gets a chance to do it for a second week in a row.
Yeah, and I think what's so important, I don't think anyone would argue with me in the nature that college sports is. Football is there, and then basketball, it's night and day the difference of media coverage, money, everything that goes into football at the college level these days. And what Indiana's been able to do in just 1 year under one guy who is arguably one of the most confident people I have ever seen at any level of profession, and live up to that confidence. And that's where it all starts. I mean, he comes in and just with a complete culture change, and it's like, I don't want to rebuild. I don't want to take 3 years. I want to do this now. Foot on the gas at all times, 60 minutes. I mean, that's what they did against Nebraska. They did not need to score that 8th touchdown, but it was like, there was a clip when IU was up 42-7, and again they panned to Signetti, and he just looks so mad. And it reminds me, very different magnitudes, but it was the 2013 BCS championship when Alabama was curb stomping Notre Dame, and Saban was pissed. And he falls from the same tree, and it's that kind of culture and mentality that's like, that's how you make something happen, and he is making something happen.
We've talked a lot on the various shows on Crimson Cast about the culture change. We're going to keep talking about that. We talked about that some with the 2 shows we did earlier this week with Ben Portnoy from Sports Business Journal and then from Zach Osterman as well. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of things to factor in, and it's going to be a great scene all throughout the course of the next couple of days. We got home field and upstairs pub collabs going on. We got a live show from 5 to 6. For those of you who are out there watching, Joe's going to join me along with a couple other special guests at the upstairs pub at 5 o'clock on Friday of this week. We're going to do a live 1-hour show, and we hope that you're able to join us there for that. That'll be a lot of fun. There's some other great stuff going on later on that day, and then, of course, a lot of stuff at upstairs that morning. You got game day down the street at Memorial Stadium. You got tailgating going on, and then you got a noon kick as Indiana takes on Washington. And hopefully the players, all they're focused on is that game against Washington and focused on, hey, we got to play with this same level of just focus and put ourselves in a position where Washington isn't a factor. We'll see if they're able to take care of that. Joe, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. And I do feel a little bit bad for the players because of the fact it's like to succeed in this moment where they are being at Indiana, they have to be all focused on the next game, on the next practice. And I think it's a little bit hard right now to kind of embrace everything until after each game. Like they're able to take that 24 hours. And that's what they've been talking about is like, we got 24 hours where we can enjoy this. And then it's back to the drawing board for next week. So up to this point, they have lived up to it. They have passed in flying colors. This is the big one right here. I mean, this is the eyes of the nation are on Indiana the entire morning of college football. And yeah, the game's on Big Ten Network, but still, people will know and about Indiana being a college football team if they didn't know that already, or if they weren't believing. This is the time to believe. I think it is important to note for fans too, if at some point this team loses in the regular season, to not jump off what's happening, because it's still history that's been made. It's still a tremendous feat that's happened. And we even talked about it before, that the top of the top have lost. Georgia has a loss. Texas has a loss. Alabama has a loss. And those fans will still show up.
It's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. And I agree with you. I think, this team has given so much so far this season. Still a lot more to go. Still 5 games in the regular season, and then we'll see what happens after that. But should be a lot of fun. We'll go ahead and wrap up here as I'm rapidly losing my voice, so we should probably get out while the getting's good. My thanks to Joe Cronin. My thanks to Emily Fox, our delightful producer, for making everything work. My thanks to all of you folks for tuning in to a primetime episode of Bison Chat. We'll be back next week. We'll have time TBD, but watch Twitter, watch YouTube. You'll find out when we're going. Thanks to all you folks. Enjoy the hell out of these next few days. Get out there, support the team on Saturday, and we will talk to you soon. Again, for Joe Cronin, for Emily Fox, I'm Galen Clavio. Thanks for watching Bison Chat. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.